And we are watching now to the left of your screen what has been nothing short of catastrophe for the Amtrak line just south of Seattle today. We are getting word now that 70 people were actually on the train that we know in parts have derailed. Look at the picture now. Again, getting some new information and new images in here. This is Amtrak in Seattle. This is the Cascades line, which is a brand new line as of today. People on that train described in some instances a feeling of going downhill because, you know, everybody has a cell phone. So we can get reports from inside that train as long as people are injured. We know that there are casualties in all of this. As the train then pitched, derailed off a part of that line and landed on Interstate 5 southbound and came to rest. Part of that train, as you can see from the pictures, is still dangling. Casualties can mean injuries or death or both. We don't know yet, but we do know the number of the people on that train now confirmed at 70 at this point. Let's go to Jonathan Hunt as he has been reporting what's happening at the scene and can bring us up to speed. So you're collecting the information there. What have you learned?
Yeah, Harris, this was Amtrak 501. It had left Seattle earlier this morning and then just about an hour ago was leaving this new station in Tacoma, had actually pulled out of that station, heading close to a small town called DuPont on its way south. As we have been looking at the map of this route, it appears to have taken a curve around Eagles Pride Golf Course there and then was going across what you can clearly see is the overpass over the very busy I-5, and that is where the derailment happened. Now, there are some reports that the train was traveling at around 80 miles per hour at that point. If that is the case, it would be close, according to experts, to its top speed. Now, as you say, there were some 70 people on board, and as you look at the picture on the left, you can see one of the cars very clearly dangling off of that overpass. What I can tell you from other closer up pictures we have seen is that underneath that dangling car there is another one that is completely flat, very badly damaged, lying across I-5. Now, the local sheriff has tweeted, and this is a quote, "There are injuries and casualties." The sheriff did not himself define the difference between injuries and casualties. We will obviously find out a lot more about that in the coming minutes and hours. But what may be very significant indeed here, Harris, is that this was a new route. There was a ribbon-cutting ceremony on Friday for this, and the Washington Department of Transport had put out a press release on Friday touting these upgrades to what it said were significant parts of the tracks, the signals, and a new station in Tacoma. They said they had spent $800 million on passenger train improvements along this line. And this was the first passenger carrying train to actually travel along the new parts, upgraded parts of this track and through these upgraded signals. So NTSB investigators are on their way there now. They'll be looking very closely at all of those parts of the track, obviously all of the signals. They'll be looking at the speed of the train, and they'll want to interview the engineer. They'll want to know what condition he was in, if there was any medical emergency, of course, all the usual things that they look at, Harris.
All right, I know you can hear me, and I didn't want to cut in, but I want to draw everybody's attention to the screen because these are now different. These are live pictures coming from DuPont, Washington. These are not just the still images that we were bringing you before. And sometimes this can communicate so much about what Jonathan is saying. And look at the urgency there. You see the first responders on the ground. You can now see a very close-up picture, live video of the car that is dangling off that overpass. You can clearly see now, Jonathan, from what you're saying, we understand that first car would be flattened at the bottom of the screen. And we understand just how dire that situation is because all of those emergency vehicles have pulled up to that one point and are now covering the vantage point that we had before. We hope that they are able to pull people out. You made the you read the tweet from officials, injuries and casualties. We know that casualties can be both, but they have not made definitive determination of whether we're looking solely at injuries or deaths or both. So We're watching for that detail. I want to add into what you were saying, Jonathan, about this expensive and first day experience with this line, the Cascades line along Amtrak. It is the main train up the Pacific Northwest coast from Eugene, Oregon, through Portland, Seattle, Vancouver, Canada. Many stops along the way. So that gives you an idea. They were picking people up all along. About 70 people, we're told, are on that train. Joining us now by phone is former National Transportation Safety Board member John Goglia. And John, we're glad you're with us. We're sorry that it is on this kind of an occasion, but can you bring us up to speed with any further details?
I don't have any further details. I can talk about the NTSB launching a major team. This is a major event in transportation, and the best and brightest that the NTSB has will be on their way to Washington.
So is there anything else that you could tell us about some of the initial pictures that we're seeing from the scene? This is Sandra Smith, and we have to remind everybody that we just learned about this. It's only been minutes now since this all began, and we're looking at the scene there. Traffic, cars backed up for likely miles now, as this is still in the initial phases of what we're looking at there in Washington. Still, we do not know. What we do know is there were 70 people on board when this train derailed, but the number of fatalities we still do not know. And we're not just talking about people on that train car, but obviously the cars below as well.
It's a potential to be a real disaster for the 70 people, not knowing how many people were in that one car that's essentially flattened. Doesn't look very good. Yeah. And the car that is dangling, those passengers probably were UFOs inside the train, flying around.
Oh my goodness!
Likely that there's severe injuries there. It's not good.
John, what kind of presence does the NTSB have on the ground at this point with a scene like this?
Well, we have some people in the Northwest. I would suspect that the local folks are on their way if they're not already there. But a full go team from Washington, D.C. is assembling as we speak to go. And they will have a team consisting of a number of people, but certainly given what we see on the screen right now, the signals people will be there and the tracks people will be there in force. Because, was it a track issue that caused this train to go over? Or was it a signal issue that caused it to go through and strike something? It does appear that it stopped rather quickly for that train to jump over the restraints and land on the highway. So
right.
It's a little early to speculate on all of this.
We know that it was brand new, and you have to imagine that there was even added extra attention on this line as things get a ribbon cutting days before, and then you get a launch date like today. So I would imagine that there were already some extra eyes, not from the NTSB necessarily, but certainly city officials and whatnot. Kennedy, I know you're from not too far away from here.
Yes, absolutely. I'm from Portland and lived in Seattle for many years and commuted normally on I-5, and you can't overstate the importance of this I-5 corridor. And, people from Tacoma commuting into Seattle, it is now completely gridlocked. I-5 shut down in all directions, north and south. Obviously, we're entering into a huge travel week, but as you know, Seattle is also a non-traditional progressive city, and they put a lot of local money into infrastructure and encouraging people to take public transportation like these train systems. And they've also invested a lot in streetcars in Seattle, and they've really sort of rehabbed this part of the tracks and are trying to renovate certain railways in order to accommodate this, encouraging people to use public transportation and trains specifically to get people off of I-5. Because even though Seattle is more loosely populated than some of the bigger metropolitan areas, like in the San Francisco area and, of course, here in New York and in Los Angeles, they still have a great deal of traffic because it simply wasn't constructed and zoned for the kind of heavy traffic they have now. That's why they're trying to get people onto trains.
Interesting. Yeah, and what you're saying about Interstate 5, right now they're telling people that if they do not have essential traffic, or rather reasons to travel, and it is a holiday week, so that decision gets more complicated, what's essential and what is not. They're asking people for the outlying roads around Interstate 5, those cutaways that we all know from living locally in places. They're telling people to simply stay off the roads at this point. They have all they can handle. Accidents can happen anywhere away from the scene as well. We have been talking with the former National Transportation Safety Board member, John Goglia. And John, before we let you go, I just want to get your expertise on what this is playing like right now on the ground. You've got that one dangling car. You said that there would have been people flying inside of that. You know a lot about the safety restraints and things inside trains. What are we looking at in terms of potentially what's gone on with the human toll of this?
It's just staggering to even think about it, because the folks were probably taken totally unaware, and the goods that are on top of the seats, unlike airplanes, some of these trains don't have bins. So you may have objects flying around. It just pains me to even think about the condition of the people that were in those cars.
You said that GO team from D.C. would already be assembling at this point, so that will be the investigative arm of all of this. John Goglia, we appreciate you coming with us live today to help us navigate through some of these things. As you said from the beginning, you don't have any more on-the-ground type of information than we do right now, because there's a live rescue going on right in the middle of the screen. So we will learn about this together, but we appreciate your expertise on investigations. John, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So we're continuing to look at these live images out of Washington State. An Amtrak train derailed on the freeway overpass there in Washington. We don't know a lot yet about injuries or possible fatalities from this train that is still dangling. This train car is still dangling over the highway there. Amtrak has put out a statement that really only addresses the scheduling that this is thrown off for Amtrak. We have not yet heard specifically from the company themselves what they know about what has caused that train derailment there in Washington State. Gus Ubaldi is a railroad engineer expert. He's on the phone with us right now. Gus, you've been looking at these pictures with us, Gus. This is Sandra Smith. Thank you for jumping on the phone with us. What can you tell us about what you're seeing, and what can you make of it?
Well, I have to start with what I always talk about, derailment 101. There are three things that are going to put a train on the ground. There's something wrong with the track, there's something wrong with the equipment, there's something wrong with the way it was operated. If you recall, there was that grain train, I think up in North Dakota, derailed and hit a train that was carrying crude oil, and that was a broken axle. The Philadelphia crash at Frankfurt Junction, May of 2015, was train handling. The guy was going around the curve too fast. Wide gauge on the track, broken rail as the train went over it. All those, and what the NTSB, Amtrak, railroads are going to do is they're going to start where the train ended up, and they're going to walk backwards to see where it left the track. And it could have happened a half mile before it, and it finally crashed over the bridge.
Wow.
Gus, when we look at these pictures, we're still trying to wrap our minds around how many cars derailed. Some passengers reportedly saying 7 cars derailed. Some passengers reportedly saying they had to kick out train windows to try to escape. When you look at these pictures, are you able to draw any conclusions based on all the instances you said that a train can derail? Are you able to garner speed at which this train may have been going, or what may have caused this?
You'd be surprised the forces that are involved when a train starts moving. And remember, even if a train breaks in half, where the cars separate, that releases all the air and it's going to set all the brakes. But if the train is no longer on the rails, having the brakes set isn't really going to do anything, and you've got now this piece of metal that's just moving through the air.
What is the average speed that a train like this would have been going, carrying passengers?
It's hard to say. I was reading online that this is a new service that they're going to operate at a maximum of 79 miles per hour, and you have to understand that 79 miles per hour back, I think, in probably late 40s, early 50s. So it's just about a little bit before my time. The Interstate Commerce Commission said that if a train was going to be going 80 miles an hour or faster, it needed a special type of signal system. This is long before positive train control ever came out. And so a lot of railroads said, look, we don't need to go 80 miles an hour. We'll go 79. Now, there are all sorts of reasons why a train isn't going to go 79 miles an hour. It could be curve. It could be it's leaving a station. It's just arriving at a station. It's maybe going to be changing tracks. So that train could be moving anywhere from 5 miles an hour to 79 miles per hour.
Gus,
but once it goes on the ground, you can't stop it.
All right, so what is the status of positive train control and the longer distance Amtrak trains and the commuter trains that we see in this country, considering, the massive fatality crash that we saw in Los Angeles about 8 years ago?
That started all this.
Yes, exactly. So what is the status and what is the likelihood that this train had positive train control?
Well, it's hard to say, and again, even if it had positive train control, it may not have affected it. If it was a broken axle, once it goes on the ground, positive train control doesn't take effect. Also, keep in mind that the aspect of positive train control that always comes up in these types of accidents, that portion of it exists in technology that's a couple of decades old.
Yeah.
And it could easily be installed without all the bells and whistles of positive train control. Think of it as my house is on fire and I need to call the fire department. Okay, do I need the iPhone 15 or can I pick up a landline and call?
Gus,
Either one will work.
Gus, what can you tell us about the age of the train that we're looking at and the condition of the tracks on which it was traveling?
Well, let me say this. Judging from the pictures I'm seeing, that's a fairly new locomotive. Can't tell the cars. The track was probably put there over 100 years ago by the Southern Pacific. However, over time, that track is going to be continually upgraded and inspected and renewed, and it's probably got brand new rail on it. It's probably got welded rail. It may have concrete ties. It may have wooden ties. But, FRA has track safety standards that say that if you're going to be running trains up to 79 miles an hour on this track, you need to have certain tolerances in terms of maintenance. So track has to be inspected twice a week at a minimum if I'm going to carry passengers over it. Go ahead.
Well, Gus, I was just going to say, we know that this was a brand new line. We know that it had a ribbon cutting for it on Friday, and we know that they've just spent north of $800 million on doing upgrades, not just only to this line or purchasing equipment for this brand new rollout today, as we understand from our reporting with Jonathan Hunt, but for the whole system there that Amtrak is running in the region and the area. So we do know those details. We would hope in all of that money spending that they would have maybe gotten to some of the areas that you're talking about. We also know from our reporting that the train was going 18 miles per hour. Let's listen in to a local television station and watch together KOMO.
In any of the vehicles is a fatal. The fatals are all contained to the train. As far as the numbers go, they're still working on that. What caused it to derail will be up to the NTSB, but what we do know is southbound I-5 is completely closed and will be for quite some time.
And you mentioned the train derailed at about 7:40 this morning. Was there any traffic on the rails before that, around that time?
We don't know anything that when it comes to the rails yet, what's going on. Yeah. So this is what you're seeing is what it is. And on the other side of that bridge, there's 3 or 4 more cars that are upside down on the road and in the woods.
And you mentioned there are some people who have been able to walk off the train where they are right now.
People that have walked off the train, they're being cared for, and transportation's coming to take care of them.
That's where they are in those tents that we're seeing behind us. Can you talk a little bit about what we're seeing behind us, where people are being treated?
Well, one of the things, we train for this all the time. We have Air Force bases and train tracks and ferries, and so this is a multiple agency response, a very coordinated response between multiple fire departments, JBLM, Thurston County, Pierce County, and they're all working in a pre-planned operation, which is to get the survivors out, get the injured to the hospitals, and obviously if there's fatals, they'll have to deal with those later.
And as a point of clarification, I may have missed it, but it's early on, but do you have any idea, when you say multiple fatalities, does that mean dozens, or does that mean...
At this point, we're just told there's multiple fatalities. What that means, I don't know. I've heard a lot of different numbers, so we're not confirming anything until somebody does it.
Do you know how many cars are involved on the train?
Hang on a sec. What?
Okay, so that was Ed Troyer with the Pierce County Sheriff's Office. They're having us move off of the on-ramp where we have been this morning, so we're going to try and stay with us.
All right. Okay, so we were just watching the local station, Channel 4 there in Seattle, Washington, Como, and you heard the reporter saying that they were asking questions of the Pierce County Sheriff's Officer who was there. They're being asked to move out of place. They no doubt are going to set up triage command center. We know from covering these types of incidents that they would have done that closer in. They may be widening the perimeter as well, which is also pretty standard for these things as they thankfully, hopefully pull more people out. We do not have a number of multiple fatalities. We don't know exactly what that will mean because the person from the Pierce County Sheriff's Office didn't know either. But this was an interesting detail and it's important. We were talking about speed of the train earlier. We do know from our own reporting, Jonathan Hunt had said it was going an estimated 18 miles per hour. As I understood him to say, and from what I'm reading, that would have been about the maximum speed for that section of track that the train was on. But we'll work to see if that was in fact the case, but that's what our reporting was earlier on. And then from that Pierce County Sheriff's Officer, he just told us in reference to the question of how many cars are involved outside of the two that you see on your screen, the one that's flattened on the ground that you can barely see, and the one that's dangling off that overpass where the first one went off, that there are 3 or 4 more train cars now out of sight, out of the views of our cameras, into the wooded area that you see, potentially behind the bridge where you see all the authorities working the scene. And they are turned upside down from what we're being told there at that news conference. 70 people on board. We're learning now how many of them were affected via injuries or deaths, but we do know that there were multiple fatalities. Russ Quimby is a rail safety consultant and a former NTSB train and rapid transit crash investigator. Russ, thank you for your expertise today. Your initial reaction as you see these pictures and you learn the details that we are now reporting.
Well, it's highly unusual if it's true that the train derailed at 18 miles an hour. That's a very low speed, and that would indicate that there was some kind of either a mechanical problem or a track problem.
Interesting. You know, I have made perhaps the jump just based on things that I've covered before, that when you have a rollout of a system like they had a first day for this Cascades train line, which was driving along the rather iconic viewpoint of Puget Sound, and they were very proud to get this as one of their first pieces of spending hundreds of millions of dollars upgrading the Amtrak line there, the Cascades line. As you learn about that, what kind of extra eyes would have been on this train, if any at all?
Well, there might have been some Amtrak officials, being it was the first rollout, as you say, first movement of that train, or state officials. There might even been some FRA people involved. But all the inspections and everything that goes on with that would have taken place before the train rolled. And I believe that's a Union Pacific main line, used to be Southern Pacific.
That's what I've read too.
That's a fairly busy and well inspected part of the railroad.
Hey, Russ, I'm going to jump in there. I do believe it's been reported that the train was traveling 80 miles per hour. Obviously, that's going to be an unknown until it is confirmed otherwise. Reports initially, it was traveling at 80 miles per hour. My question to you would be, and this is Sandra Smith, by the way, would there have been, based on all we can possibly know at this point, if the brakes had been put on and had there been any warning, would you expect to passengers as what was approaching, even if it was seconds?
No, there probably not been a warning to the passengers. 80 miles an hour, if his speed limit was 79, obviously 80 miles an hour was 1 mile an hour over, but that's well within what the tolerance that's allowed. He would have, the engineer would have got it probably a beep, an overspeed beep, and for even the 1 mile an hour, and it would begin to bring it down. So, I mean, you can get 1 mile an hour over just going downhill a little bit. If he was going that fast, all that information is going to be recorded on the event recorder, and that'll be contained in the lead
so
locomotive
Russell,
unit.
what sticks out to you then, as we're just trying to take in any information we get at this point, and we continue to see these images and pictures, and we're getting confirmation now from the sheriff there that there were multiple fatalities, obviously injuries that occurred. But what sticks out to you as you look at these images?
Well, if I saw an overhead view or aerial view of the wreck, I'd get a better idea of some of the dynamics of the derailment, because that will indicate the speed of the train to some extent.
Yeah, they're unbelievable pictures to see there. Marie Harf, you seem to want to jump in with a question.
Yeah, Russ, this reminds me a little bit of the 2015 derailment that we saw around Philadelphia. And from what I've been looking at, Amtrak had 11 safety recommendations that were given to them by the NTSB and others. I think after that, it killed 8 people, 200 were injured. Turned out it was engineer failure, but the train didn't have, as Kennedy mentioned earlier, positive train control, or some of these systems that if there is operator error, they help prevent this. Do you have a sense if the Amtrak folks put in place some of these safety recommendations that were given down to them in 2016 in the wake of that Philadelphia accident?
No, I don't. I believe they did implement their ACES system, which is basically their version of positive train control on that curve outside of Philadelphia. The track in this accident, I believe, is owned by the Union Pacific, and I suspect, in fact, I'm pretty sure that positive train control had been implemented on that track. I know that about a year ago, they'd had a completion of most of their positive train control in the western part of their system.
But
so
that's
I
not a
suspect this
fail-safe.
might have had positive train control, and that Amtrak train would have been equipped with the same equipment.
Right. So for our viewers, describe what positive train control actually does. It's not a fail-safe. It's just another level of safety for the train. Is that correct?
Correct. Basically, what it does is if the engineer fails to comply with a signal or a speed restriction, it automatically will take control of the train and brake it and bring it down to where it complies with the speed limit.
You know, it's interesting because I was just reading up on that May 12th, 2015 derailment that you're talking about. 8 people died. 185 others were transported to area hospitals. So I do remember the discussion at that time about making some changes.
Right.
You know, as we kind of go back and forth today, just learning how this whole thing has played out, I want to bring everybody up to speed in case you're just tuning into Outnumbered. In the middle of your screen is now a still picture. Interstate 5 has been shut down at last check in both directions, but certainly southbound we had been told first. And this is around the collision point of a train falling onto the overpass or off of an overpass here near Mounts Road. It is south of Seattle in the Tacoma area, south there we're told, and that this line would have been carrying about 70 people at the time. One car flattened from eyewitness reports and from the officials there on the ground from the eye. You know, that may or may not mean that it's on its side. We don't know. But certainly the one that's dangling off the overpass we can see in the pictures if we go back to the live video. And then out of sight, which we learned from a news conference just a few minutes ago, would be 3 to 4 more cars that have been left upside down in a wooded area away from this. So as Sandra pointed out, the speed at which it was going was far beyond what I had been reporting. At 80 miles per hour, it tops out at 79. Our guest here, who's helping us navigate this, Russ Quimby, a rail safety consultant and former NTSB train and rapid transit accident expert, is saying that you could pick up a mile or 2 per hour just in terms of going downhill. Not that this has anything to do with that speed, but people inside had called in to Fox News on their cell phones about an hour ago, talking with our colleagues, John Scott, and Melissa Francis and described a feeling of going downhill. That potentially could have been when the car that you see in the center of your screen was following the other one off that overpass. We don't know that for certain, but that was the feeling that people were explaining. The good news in all of that is that there were people explaining some things. Of course, the heartbreaking news, and we don't have a number for this, is that there have been multiple fatalities. So we are learning a little bit at a time, dribs and drabs, as we have news conferences from the ground just getting started. We've had, the Pierce County Sheriff's Officer come out and give us some details there on the ground. As we learn more, of course, we'll bring it to you. But this right now is playing out live in Washington State. And is a catastrophe on the first day of this brand new Amtrak Cascades line. Sandra?
Hey, Russ, could you give us an idea of what's protocol as far as how often the trains themselves are checked and tested, and the railways?
Well, the railways in this case, because the Federal Railroad Administration classifies track 1 through 6, basically. The higher the number, the higher the speed. And the higher the speed, the closer the tolerances are that are measured, and also the more frequent the inspections. So this track was probably looked at least 2 or 3 times a week. And I imagine before the run of this operations, the track inspectors went over it. That's generally, of course, the better the track, the more frequent the inspections.
And this is obviously, Russ, it's Kennedy here on the Outnumbered couch. This is obviously a high-profile day for Amtrak, and regionally, as this was the maiden voyage of that train leaving the new station, a lot of money has been invested in that area. So what does your gut tell you, and how much does the newness of this day play into this fatality incident that we've seen?
Well, if you're going to be in a vehicle that goes along the ground, so to speak, or on rails, Amtrak cars are extremely crash-worthy, and there's a lot of features built into them. But they're not designed to take. Nothing's designed to take the kind of hits that looks like this one took. I would say most of the people who are injured or even killed probably died of secondary impacts inside the cars.
Our thoughts are certainly with all those that are involved at this point. It's that the rescue efforts are ongoing. The first report of this derailment came in at about 7:40 a.m. on the West Coast. So you're talking about a couple hours ago. And as you can see, the first responders are on the scene and actively rescuing people. We're told those that didn't make it may still be on the train, but some may have made it off of those train cars, even as they were dangling, possibly making their way out of windows. We have yet to hear any of those stories. We just have pictures, Russ, to lean on at this point. Kennedy asked a good question, though. Just based on your gut, when you see this, what is your thoughts about what could have possibly happened?
Well, I hate to until a safety board accident team gets there. I'd hate to make a conjecture, but right now I'd probably say this is an equipment or a track derailment.
As we step away from the speculation, I do want to bring in Larry Elder. He's on the couch right now, and just kind of get you into the conversation here. Good morning. And great to have you. It's unfortunate that we have this situation playing out. But I want to draw everybody's attention now. You see some of the urgency with which, and sometimes you learn a lot just by how people are moving around, the first responders. But Larry, just to bring you into the conversation.
Well, what it shows you one more time is that life is completely unpredictable. You never know what's going to happen. You get up in the morning, you expect it to be a routine day, and something like this happens. We heard about the airline flight being backed up in Atlanta. Life is just full of surprises. And so hug your loved ones and don't assume that tomorrow is guaranteed.
Amen to that.
And especially, today, what an exciting day. You think that you have a new way of commuting. You're the first person on that train. It's like a world of possibilities open up in a place which has really been plagued by traffic congestion. Right. And then something like this happens a week before Christmas. Imagine all of those people who are unable to get a hold of their relatives. They don't know what's happened here. And that's why Pierce County Sheriff and some, obviously, local law enforcement doing whatever they can to get as much information out as possible.
Russ Quibby, can you just stand by for us? We've got Russ. He's a rail safety consultant. He's standing by. I want to go to Jonathan Hunt, though, because we need to get an update on what we know at this point. Jonathan Hunt, you are live in Los Angeles for us. What can you tell us? It's now 12:30 on the East Coast.
Yeah, what we're hearing from the sheriff's spokesman of Pierce County, Ed Troyer, is very disturbing indeed. Multiple fatalities, the sheriff's office now confirming. And as you look at the picture on the left of the screen there, you can see the one car dangling off the track. What we can tell you is that underneath that car, flat across I-5, is another car that is in very bad shape indeed. And then what the sheriff's spokesman told us, even more disturbing, on the other side of that I-5 overpass, he said, quote, there are 3 to 4 other cars that have completely derailed. And one of the quotes that the sheriff's spokesman gave to local media up there was very disturbing indeed. He said that this crash, quote, wasn't survivable. Unfortunately, that is a very disturbing scene. And as you look at the picture on screen right there, you can see just how badly crushed the car is that came down flat onto I-5. And as I was just saying, the sheriff's spokesman saying there are 3 to 4 more completely off the tracks on the other side. We don't know how many cars are left up on the tracks. We can't see from the vantage points that we have so far had, but clearly you've got 1 dangling, 1 on this side of the overpass completely flat, and 3 to 4 the other side. A total of 70 passengers were aboard Amtrak 501, as we understand. Impossible to tell at this stage how many were in those affected cars, but clearly when you hear the sheriff's spokesman say multiple casualties, it wasn't survivable, unfortunately. Everybody has to brace themselves here for figures which are not going to be very good indeed. There is a terrible looking scene just south of Tacoma. Multiple fatalities, the latest we have from the sheriff's spokesman.
Right, so we're going to keep looking to the Pierce County Sheriff for continued updates. What we have seen from the Pierce County Sheriff is continued updates via pictures taken on the scene, which of course can help eventually help some of the officials involved in this to determine what happened, because at this point we just don't know. Kennedy?
No, that's what's so heart-wrenching about this is you want answers, you want to know a cause, you want to know the effects, you want to know that the people you're most concerned about are safe, those who were on board. And unfortunately, with a lot of these investigations, and trains in particular, it takes time to piece all of these things together because there's so many elements and it can be something so minute.
And there's still so many who don't know if their loved ones are affected. So while Amtrak has put out one statement so far regarding the derailment of train 501 and service disruptions, that was about 52 minutes ago. They have just a couple minutes ago put out another statement via Twitter saying individuals with questions about their friends and family on this train 501 should call 800-523-9101. I'll say that one more time, 800-523-9101.
All right. We have just gotten in a statement, and can somebody email that to me right away, please? Okay. Thank you. I'm looking for it in my Outlook. A couple of things here. Sandra, we're going to work to get that number up on the screen. 800-523.
It's up on the bottom right of the screen right now.
Let's see. Okay, off to the right there. That's great. And as soon as we get the statement from Amtrak, we'll give it to you. We've been watching very closely their Twitter page, and so we know we have been seeing that. Amtrak Cascades train 501 operating from Seattle and Portland derailed south of Tacoma, Washington. There were approximately 78 passengers and live crew members on board. 5 crew members on board. 78 passengers. Initial reports are that some injuries are reported to passengers and crew and taken to local medical facilities for treatment. Individuals with questions about their friends and family on the train should again read that number that Sandra just gave, 800-523-9101. Local emergency responders are live at the scene.
So that's an update for sure, because of initial reports where this train was carrying 70 passengers. Amtrak confirming 78 passengers and 5 crew members on board. Initial reports are that some injuries are reported, Harris, as you said, and taken to local medical facilities for treatment. We'll certainly start to get an update on the ground soon.
So I think this matters most to people who are there locally, and they may be getting it from local sources. But also what we're seeing is that service from Seattle points north and east continuing to operate at this point, but Amtrak Cascades trains 504, 509 have been canceled. No alternate transportation is available. Also, we're seeing that Interstate 5, still around this area, is shut down south and northbounds. And again, I'm not northbound, rather. I'm not sure the last check of that, but that's the latest information that we have. And what that means is that people are then put into the alternate routes and arteries around this, and they're asking people just to even stay away from those because they've got all they can handle with this live scene right now. John Hyatt is a former engineer for the BNSF Railway Company, which is one of the largest freight rail networks in North America. He's also a rail investigator for a law firm. And John, I want to thank you for being with us right now. This is a complicated scene just in terms of first responders trying to figure out which way to go first. But I would imagine just looking at this as an investigator, it's complicated too, because you want to keep the scene intact as much as possible so that you can figure out what happened.
Yes, this is horrifying. Obviously, it was good that it happened in the area that it did, so it's so easy access for the emergency responders. But it looks like there's going to be several fatalities and such a tragedy. And of course, it's the first day that this train has run as 501 over this route. And it's so hard to tell right now. There was an earlier report that there was possibly something, a truck or a car struck by the train, but I haven't heard any follow-up on that, and I just don't know for sure. But the impact and it's bad. This is very bad, and I don't know. It's just so early, and the NTSB are the best in the world at figuring this out. It will take a little time, but I'm sure within the next 6-7 hours they'll at least give us some preliminary indications.
Hey, John, can I ask you a question as we look at these images? I mean, it's just hard to tell anything at this point. So I'm sorry if this leaves room for speculation, but can you tell us? Is there continued risk when you look at the dangling train car right now that more could come down, or there could be continued movement from the train car all the way down to the road?
Yeah, that would have been one of the most difficult things to start with, is to secure and stabilize that car, and it appears that they've done so. It's amazing that it stayed attached as it did, which I said probably saved people that were on that car from further injuries, but the other cars that we can't see there have been damaged very badly. And, again, so much speculation. It looks to me like the train was a lower rate of speed. Otherwise, I suggest that car would not be dangling like that.
What would the lower rate of speed be based on what you've heard?
Well, I've heard that there's a 30-mile-an-hour curve coming into that area, and I've also heard through reports on the television they think that they were at about 18 miles an hour, and I don't know where they would come up with that information at the time of derailment.
All right, John, I have a question. Is there the equivalent of a black box on a train, like there is on airplanes?
Yes, there is. There are event recorders, and they record several different functions, and they will be very, very heavily scrutinized.
Also, a quick update coming in from the official Washington State Patrol District 1 Public Information Officer, Trooper Brooke Bova, tweeting out the Family Reunification Center at DuPont City Hall. Do not come to the scene. Is it really important that they steer people away from directly trying to arrive at this? And right now you're looking at buses departing the scene. There are evacuation charters, we're told, departing hopefully with some of those that have been able to make it off that train and are able to get to safety or even medical help. But right now you can imagine there's a lot of family and friends who are trying to find their loved ones and see if they were possibly on that train or if they've been able to get off.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a mess.
John, we do know early reports from, and here at Fox News, from people who were inside somehow or another those cars. People always have their cell phones on these days, it would seem. But early reports would show that people were making calls from inside there. And not to go down the speculation road, we are only hopeful in the fact that, when you hear a detail like what Jonathan Hunt reported there from the ground, that there's concern that some of this might not have been survivable. As you get away from that infraction point of that train car falling off the overpass, perhaps people were able to get out. We've heard conflicting reports of whether people were able to crawl out and do all of that, but we're hopeful at this point.
Yeah, and it looks like, as we're looking at those pictures now, generally when they mark a car like that, that means that they've taken care of everyone in that particular car. So, that's generally, and I can see that they haven't marked those other two cars, which they're still in the process of probably clearing out, or had not stabilized. And it looks like, I don't know what kind of a feat it would be to stabilize a car hanging like that. But
right.
Hats off to the first responders, because it looks like they've done quite a job. And like I said, because of the access to the area, that's very fortunate. But as you stated, I think I live right in this area. Don't anybody try to go out there. They've got their hands full as it is right now.
And it's
they're
close.
asking people not to, because anything can happen away from a scene, and then they've got so many things that are deployed to this area. They're really asking people, if it's not essential, necessary travel, to stay off the roads near this area right now outside of Tacoma. Larry?
John, I understand this is the line's inaugural run. Thankfully, rail accidents are rare. I would imagine it's even more rare for something like this to happen in its inaugural run. How often does something like this happen?
Well, obviously the inaugural run it's very unusual that it would happen on that particular run. But there's a lot of these smaller incidents that go on daily and around the system and around the country, and you just don't hear reports because there's no fatalities or no serious injuries involved.
Right.
But something of this magnitude is rare, and it's just horrifying, and it's so hard to speculate on anything. And I know, I have talked to some of the people, and I've talked to a couple of different Amtrak employees that know the people working on the train. They said they have a very top-notch crew. As you know, I deal every day in and day out with all these people out on Amtrak and on board and engineer and operating, and they're a very, very professional bunch. So I think, I would hesitate to point any fingers in that direction.
That's a very important detail that you're giving us that comes from only your perspective, John Hyatt, because we don't know any of the team that would have been working this line, but what you're saying is important for people to hear. And I know we've got some confirmation, Sandra, of the NTSB and what they're doing next.
They're launching a GO team to investigate the Amtrak passenger train derailment in the state of Washington. Team will depart D.C. today. Additional information to follow when available. That's an update from the NTSB that is sending a team right now to Washington State. John, if I could bring up one other thing as we continue to look at these live pictures there, is the weather. Just worth pointing out, because we haven't gotten any aerial images yet, and it's been raining. It's foggy, we're told. Hard to tell in these pictures if it might be pretty wet or still raining at this moment, but any local weather forecast right now says that there was supposed to be some rain in the forecast all morning.
Moisture-wise for this area, we have not had anything out of the ordinary. It's actually probably been a little mellower than usual. I would hesitate to think that there was any kind of a incident where land shifted or anything like that, or a slide or anything like that. It hasn't been of that magnitude. So, and the fog, we're in Seattle. It's always a little bit gray here.
I know. I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, there wasn't a heavy one this morning because I was just preparing to go on I-5 down to Vancouver. And it wasn't anything out of the ordinary.
Washington. There are two Vancouver. Over the bridge.
Correct. Sorry.
So we are just coming up on 10 minutes before the next hour, and we want to remind everybody of what they're watching on their screen, and also welcome people who are turning to Outnumbered for the first time and seeing first responders and the looks of an emergency response in the center of your screen. This is DuPont, Washington.